Welcome, everybody, to an all-new episode of Canzano and Wilner, the podcast. We appreciate everybody who watches this show on YouTube. If you're watching now, hit that subscribe button for us and make a commitment to us. If you're listening on the podcast, you can do the same thing. I'm Jon Canzano. You can read me at joncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. We have a great episode today, a Q&A episode, and we're going to be all over the place with talking about former Pac-12 schools, current Pac-12 schools, future Pac-12 schools, some miscellaneous items as well. And Wilner is here. Happy 2025, my friend.
Same to you. Thanks, everybody, for the questions, and also, as always, for all the support over the last few years. I love doing we do it 4 times a year, just devote an episode to the listeners for their questions, and we've got a lot of good ones here.
Yeah, and I love it, man. I was out at the Rose Bowl, and I often get notes from people who are viewers of this podcast and listeners, and other people walk up and say, "Oh man, I love what you and Wilner are doing. I love the podcast." But if you want to support, you're obviously part of the team because you're here watching. Support, just share it with people. Yep. I think the more you share it, the more the merrier. And I appreciate everybody as well. Let's jump into this, man. You've got the questions. I will. We've got them organized. How hard was it for you to organize the questions, Wilner?
Yeah, not too bad. It's a good mix. Sometimes it's the interest goes in different directions, but we had a nice wide array of questions. I think part of it's the time of year. There's a lot going on, and it was no problem rounding them up. That's for sure.
Well, let's do it. Let's start with Q&A with the Pac-12 schools.
Pac-12 schools.
Where do we got?
So here we go. It's a little bit newsy too. I figured we'd start with some news. I've been thinking about which school Oregon State basketball coach Wayne Tinkle may have been speaking about when he said there was a school that was 24 hours away from joining the Pac-12 that would have created, quote unquote, shockwaves. So I'll let you know what, this was your baby, so I will let you take it here.
Well, Tinkle joined me on Monday's radio show, and really he's got this season where he's making hay with international players. He's got players that speak 7 different languages in his locker room. He's Turkey and Greece, and he's found an angle. Like a lot of coaches are looking for an angle, so he's gone international. Team looks really coachable. They're playing well. And so I had him on to talk basketball and really, a game with Gonzaga that he has at home and on all that. And I asked him about the future Pac-12 basketball league. Like, is it a 3-bid league? Is it a 4-bid league? What is it? Like when you talk about Gonzaga and San Diego State and Boise State and Utah State and Fresno State and Colorado State, you start to talk about a pretty serious basketball conference. And Tinkle pivoted towards, I'll play the audio here. He pivoted towards talking about how good he feels about the conference and the makeup of the conference.
So I think we're going to have enough talent in that conference to where year in and year out, I'd love to think we could get consistently 4 to 5 teams in. And there's teams to be added. I think there's, I haven't heard anything. I did hear there was one particular school that was 24 hours away from joining. I'm not going to mention them. That would have sent shockwaves, but I know that Teresa Gould and I know the athletic directors both at Washington State and Scott Barnes and the schools that we've already added are fighting hard to find the right institutions to join. But I think there's going to be some great additions even beyond what we've already gotten, and it's going to be great to be a part of the rebuild for sure.
Now, when he drops that nugget into the middle of the show, my radar goes up, of course. And got off air, Wilner, I started poking around, kicking tires. I believe the school that he's talking about there is UConn. I think they were unhappy in the Big East. I think they may have kicked the tires with the Pac-12. Certainly there was a flirtation with the Pac-12 that happened, maybe much the same way that Memphis and Tulane at least had some opening dialogue with the conference. It makes sense from a basketball perspective if you're building a juggernaut basketball conference to go, at least talk with UConn. For now, I don't want to make too much of it because I think geographically it doesn't make sense. And obviously it didn't happen in that 24-hour period. but really interesting to hear him talk like that.
For sure. And we should also caution our viewers that what the basketball coaches or the football coaches might think is not necessarily the reality at the highest levels of power when you're talking about realignment, right? That is presidents, it's regents, it's trustees, and, things can trickle down that aren't necessarily reflective of exactly what's going on. So if a coach thinks that within 24 hours of it happening, that doesn't necessarily make it so. My guess is, like you said, right, conversations, but was UConn ever really on the brink of saying yes? I would be awfully surprised if that was the case.
Yeah, and look, you and I both have reported that, there was at least some contact with Memphis and Tulane. Probably wasn't a formal offer, but it was some initial dialogue that was open before they reversed and went back to the American, or at least for now went back to the American. I've heard other schools that have come up. St. Mary's has, been in contact with the Pac-12. I think Creighton has been in contact, at least. There's some interest there because they see what's going on from a basketball perspective. But to your point, I had another coach tell me that he thought a Big 12 school was within 24 hours of joining. And as I ran that down, it didn't make sense to me. Why would a Big 12 school give up, a $30 million media rights distribution in exchange for what appears to be much less? But the coaches, sometimes it's wishful, sometimes it's not. I certainly am looking at coaching moves that get made. You see the coach that takes the job at UNLV. Is he going to UNLV to stay in the Mountain West, or is he going into UNLV because he knows something the rest of us don't?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I mean, there's no chance a Big 12 school would be thinking seriously about joining the Pac-12. Now, what the Pac-12 does have that could be appealing to the Creightons or schools at that level, St. Mary's, is it's in the market right now trying to sign a new deal. And it's, the market is constantly rising. So there's a chance that any deal the Pac-12 signs is going to be better than a deal a current school has. Also, Gonzaga is an attractive piece, the most attractive piece outside of the Power Four, right? So schools would want to be in a conference that includes Gonzaga and San Diego State, which is in the national championship game 2 years ago. So there's some interesting chess pieces in Pac-12 basketball for sure.
Yeah. And I think, look, at some point, access to the CFP becomes attractive to some of those Big 12 schools, but you're not going to walk away from $30 million to take half that or less than half that in media rights distributions from the Pac-12. You'd have to have those two numbers be with any, a view of the front windshield to even make that consideration. And you're not there right now. It's different than the conversation that I think we talked about with the ACC. Like if there was an implosion in the ACC, as Scott Barnes, the AD at Oregon State, said, chaos is our friend.
Yep.
Like if there's an implosion in the ACC, certainly, there are some loose pieces there that you could grab, but that's a different conversation than saying, hey, walk away from $30 million and come take 12 or 13 million to be part of a conference that gives you some better access to the playoff.
Yep, for sure. What do we got next? Okay, I see people talk about regionality with the rebuilding Pac-12. Does a Western Regional Conference actually have value? The last Pac-12 got gutted for parts, and the Mountain West gets less than half of what the American Conference does. Why care about Western regionality when all signs point to it not mattering? So this gets to, what the rebuilt Pac-12 wants to be, right? Does it want to be the best of the West, or does it want to be national? I kind of think there's a lot of appeal to being best of the West, right? But you certainly have to do your due diligence and see what's out there. And I don't think the Pac-12 is finished looking at what's out there. The issue, though, it's the same issue that the Pac-12 faced and any conference out here faces: population, time zones, the way TV programs. All those things are inherently working against conferences out here for basketball or football. It's not all bad, but those are certainly obstacles, right? I mean, the vast majority of Division I basketball programs and the vast majority of FBS football programs are in the eastern 2/3 of the country. So that makes it, you've got a greater audience, you've got easier scheduling. There's just some natural obstacles out here.
Yeah, the media value, as we've all learned, is driven by your population base, your TV market. It's driven by your brand. Can you offer more TV windows to a broadcaster? So, the Pac-12, as they go to sit down, and the New World Pac-12, as they go to make this decision, they've got Path A, that is this really tight regional conference that's got substance. It's kind of a throwback conference in the way that, like, some of these others are not anymore.
Yep.
It's lean, it's mean, the travel costs are low. There's some that's super attractive to some of these schools. And I've talked to a number of ADs who say, hey, we'd like to avoid having to travel across multiple time zones unless there's a ton of money sitting over there on the other side. So that's the national path where, there's no brainer money sitting over there. And I kind of lean toward seeing this like as a two-pronged thing, because everybody expects there's going to be more chaos in 2030, 2031, 2032, when some of these other media rights deals and these other conferences come up again. So I kind of think the Pac-12 stays regional unless there's a no-brainer out there, if that makes sense. It's almost like, if you came to me and said, hey, I got a job offer here, I'm going to move my family. You don't move for it's got pluses and minuses. You move if it's a no-brainer job move that's definitely going to benefit your family. I think that's how the Pac-12's got to think.
Yep. Nope. Makes sense. Let's see. All right. Here's a Washington State question. Cougars have about 15 transfers coming from South Dakota State following Coach Jimmy Rogers. What do you think about the volume of FCS talent coming in? Is this more risk than reward? And is there a recent comparison?
There's a recent comparison for sure at Indiana.
Yep.
Kurt Cignetti. I mean, I think Ann McCoy, the AD at Washington State, saw how many players were leaving in the portal and looked over and said, how do we avoid having a complete rebuild? How do you get a coach and a busload of players in one move? Well, you hire like Indiana did. They go to the James Madison coach. Cignetti brings, double-digit players with him. It really did help him hit the ground running. He brought all his best players, and I think there's some strategy in that. And so there's a precedent for this. And, look, I looked at Washington State's schedule too. Yep. It's not an easy schedule. It's, there are some games in there, but I think Jimmy Rogers can get bowl eligible with this kind of roster and bringing that kind of continuity with him. I think it's really smart. I think a lot of those players at South Dakota probably would have been candidates to get in the portal anyway and jump up a division. They're doing it here. I think it's a nice natural move. In addition to some of those really hard games that Washington State has on its schedule, it's got some winnable games, right?
Yes,
there's some North Texas, I believe, and a couple others on there where I go, hey, that's a W. And so I think they can get to 6. Much like Oregon State, they are faced with staying visible, staying relevant in this first season.
No doubt. No doubt. I would say if they were playing in the old Pac-12, right, then stocking your roster with FCS kids, it's going to be trouble against some schools. But certainly there's no reason those players cannot compete against the schedule the Cougars have this year. And even, potentially in the rebuilt Pac-12, right? I think you do have to get your foundation in place. But in a lot of ways, it's more reward than risk for a first-year coach making the transition.
Yeah.
So here is a Beaver question.
Okay.
Is Brady Hoke the former head coach with linebacker experience that Trent Bray wants to hire as a new co-head coach?
This guy, I've talked about this for weeks. And, I do know that there's been contact with Brady Hoke in Oregon State and that Trent Bray's interested in Brady Hoke. And I absolutely think he's describing Brady Hoke there. And the fact that he said this week that he wants to be the defensive coordinator, like the head coach is going to be the D coordinator. And, Keith Hayward is out and Bray's in there, tells me that Trent Bray missed calling the defense. And maybe he doesn't love some of the things that go along with being a head coach. So if you're going to do that, and you've seen coaches call plays. If you're going to do that, you've got to have somebody who has some gray hair, who has done the head coaching thing and can come in and be a really trusted advisor to help take some of that load off of you. It's Brady Hoke. I think Brady Hoke's going to end up back at Oregon State. I think it's just a matter of time.
Last one on the Pac-12. Where are we in the Pac-12 Mountain West lawsuit timeline? Any dates to keep an eye on going forward? I could jump in on that.
Yeah.
So just the other day, the Pac-12 Monday, in fact, was the deadline for the Pac-12 to file a motion of opposition to the Mountain West's motion to dismiss. So basically, this whole thing started in September with the Pac-12 taking the Mountain West to court. November, the Mountain West files its motion to dismiss the case. This week, Pac-12 files an opposition to that motion. So that's where we stand. The hearing is scheduled for late March. That's really the big date to see if this thing goes forward. I have every reason to think it will go forward. Not a lawyer, but just seems like the Pac-12's got a pretty good case to at least get it to the next step, right? And the big issues for this are, is the so-called poaching penalty that was in the scheduling agreement, is that relevant to the agreement? The Mountain West is saying yes, and the Pac-12 is saying no. There was no reason to put that poaching penalty in there. So we shall see what the judge says. It's the Northern District of California. I believe March 25th is the date of the hearing, but that's where things are right now.
Yeah, I think, I did reach out to somebody who specializes in these kinds of cases and asked an attorney. I said, hey, read this for me. Tell me what you think. And he came away believing that the judge will allow the case to go forward. He said that when these lawsuits are filed and then these briefs, these motions to dismiss are filed, the judge has to assume that everything that the Pac-12 is asserting is correct and verifiable. So because there's no discovery that is done in this process. And so he said, really, we're just talking about statutory limitations, or was there a procedural error by the Pac-12? He said he believes that the Pac-12's got some ground to stand on because, as you pointed out, the Mountain West, their whole argument is, hey, a deal's a deal. You signed a deal. And the Pac-12 is saying, yeah, we signed a deal under duress and we don't think it's legal. And so I think you're going to need a judge to decide that. I ultimately think, Wilner, that after discovery and months of billing, there's a settlement. The attorney told me these things tend to land somewhere in the middle.
Yep.
So I expect settlement, but I don't think they're talking settlement at this point.
Right. And again, it's an antitrust case. Pac-12 is saying that the poaching penalty violated antitrust law, stifling competition for schools, not only hurting the Pac-12, but also hurting the Mountain West schools' market value. So we shall see.
That's a good point. You raised that because I think it's lost on some people that it's not just the Pac-12. The lawsuit is it's not just saying, hey, you put the Pac-12 in an anti-competitive position. It's saying you put UNLV, Boise State, Utah State, you put the membership in this double jeopardy position where they couldn't go out and negotiate for themselves. And I think it's a really interesting point that, the poaching penalties are redundant. That's what the Pac-12 is arguing. So, it'll be interesting to see that. And I kind of wonder, does the Mountain West really want to be the face nationally of an argument that says, hey, conferences should be allowed to operate as monopolies? Like the Mountain West is not in that position. Like I could see the SEC or the Big Ten saying that, but I think it's a really interesting case. And, along those lines, let me pepper you with a question, since the addition of Northern Illinois as a football member and UC Davis and other sports, the Mountain West makes this move. I can't for the life of me figure out the benefit of this other than it creates a little bit of margin should the Mountain West lose another school.
Yeah, and don't forget about UC Davis in all sports except football, Grand Canyon, all sports except football, UTEP in all sports, and Northern Illinois in football only. It is it's hard to keep track. So I think that some of it is precaution in case they lose more schools, and some of it probably is for inventory purposes, especially basketball. And then, Northern Illinois gets you into a different time zone for your kickoffs.
Yeah.
So, and even UTEP, right? So they've got, they got Mountain, they got Pacific, and they got Central Time for kickoffs. I think a lot of it in terms of financially, it's all way on the margins, right?
Yeah.
Those schools aren't adding much value.
Yeah, that's what I think. The travel costs, when you start talking about travel costs and then some really marginal additive value, to me it felt so defensive, but maybe I'm missing something on that.
Well, we'll see what the market says when they sign a media deal. All right, so what are we going to next here? What do we got for our next
How
category?
About realignment?
Okay.
Are we there? Yeah.
All righty. Well, here's one right on what we were talking about. While the Mountain West has continued to add teams, should the Pac-12 fans begin to panic, or is there a positive outcome?
I'll say positive outcome because I think they're being picky, choosy. I think at least the perception is that they're not just grabbing anybody, any school, anywhere, that they're being super selective on this. And I like that. And because there was a time there where, all the reports were about, hey, Memphis and Tulane and UNLV, and they're coming up empty. And then when they got Gonzaga, there was just this skid, right? And they stopped. And everybody went, okay, now they're going to market and they're going to circle back. I wouldn't worry if I were a Pac-12 fan about the lack of activity. I think they will add some members here, or at least one or two members for basketball. They'll add somebody else who plays football. I think for scheduling purposes, it'll all work out. They'll have their automatic qualifiers for the NCAA events. I'm not too concerned about it. If we get to like March and we're still having this conversation, maybe I would start to wonder, like, okay, are they just not finding a great option? But I kind of think they know who they want at this point, and they're just plotting.
Yep. I think March, April seems like it's about right time for this whole thing.
I keep saying March 15th, March 17th, right in there.
Okay. It's certainly got to be enough time. Yeah. Again, important reminder, a lot of time exit fees increase if you leave your conference or if you announce that you're leaving within 12 months of the end of the contract. So Pac-12 has got to move quickly enough that this whole thing can happen for any new schools before July 1st of this year to announce that they are leaving their current conference. What do we got here? Okay. Everybody thinks the new Super League will be 30 to 40 schools. Why not just 12 or 18, add $100 million a year, and let everybody else fend for themselves? A Super League question, which is partly realignment because you got to restructure conferences. I would say that a lot of people think it's going to be 70 or 80. In fact, there's two proposals out there right now that have been discussed with college sports leaders that have almost the entire current Power Four and even some others, 70, 80 schools. And then you've got, relegation and promotion. I disagree. I don't think it's going to be that big. I don't think that the TV networks are going to be interested in paying a premium for, and I'm just naming some schools here, NC State against Minnesota, Mississippi State against Boston College, right? Texas, TCU against, name it, Illinois.
Yeah.
Those games are not worth that big money. The games that are worth big money are Ohio State, Georgia, right? Clemson, Michigan, USC, Florida State. I think the Super League, if it comes, will only have 32 to 40 schools. And I don't think 12 to 18 is too small to me. I don't think there's enough inventory there. But I think it would be in that 32 to 40. And then everybody else has got to reform into probably regional conferences if that's what happens.
I love the idea of a relegation promotion model because it says, hey, look, if you want to belong, go win. Right.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I'm going to bring Oregon State up here in this argument because, look, if you're only talking about 40 schools or 48 schools, like I don't see any more than 50 being part of this. I think it's like 48 and down. And you're probably right. It's probably closer to 32. It's in that range, right? But Oregon State is paying Malik Murphy, this transfer quarterback from Duke, $1.5 million. Okay, that's what the collective's paying him. They went out and they got 2 tight ends, one from BYU and one from Miami. They're paying $250,000 each to those guys. They're into 3 players, Wilner, for $2 million. It tells me that Oregon State watched what happened with the CFP and said, we need to get busy spending, and the collective needs to get busy spending if you want to matter in whatever's going to come next. Because Boise State, Arizona State, SMU, think about the elevation and profile. If it does come down to 32 or 48 schools or 40 schools, we're including those schools. Now, Oregon State, I think, is, I said, to a source, how much money do you need to spend to be a top 25 contender? They said probably north of $5 million in NIL money will get you in that conversation. And you're going to need to spend more to think about the playoff. Oregon State's got to be spending above $6 or $7 million. They have to. They have $2 million and 3 players. Plus, they had a bunch of roster retention. It tells me that they watched Arizona State, SMU, Boise State, and they said, oh, we need to spend, and we can't wait for the new World Pac-12. We need to spend now. They're going to try to matter next season.
Yep. Well, and the next 5-6 years is really an audition for everybody, right? I mean, not your Georgias and Alabamas. They would get in the Super League, but you get past those blue bloods, and it could get into a steel cage match for admission, and you want to be successful in the playoff. The question I have is, the revenue sharing piece for the rebuilt Pac-12, right? We know the Arizona States of the world are going to get up against that max at $20.5 million, of which $15 million goes to your football program. But where is the Pac-12 schools going to be? Are they going to get up to $15 million in football revenue sharing, or is it going to be somewhere below that number, right? It's a permissive cap, so you don't have to get to the top, but the less you spend, the harder it's going to be to compete. So for Washington State and Oregon State, where are they going to be in total money, revenue sharing plus traditional NIL?
Yeah, and I think 2 things. One, you're going to have some schools who are going to have NIL plus revenue sharing, 2 separate entities, right, operating here. Others are going to merge them together. I'm curious to see how that shakes out at different places. Second thing is, as I talk to some Power 4 conference head football coaches, they tell me that they don't think you need to spend $20 million to put together a roster that could win a national championship. But if they're going to be allowed to do that, they're absolutely going to spend on backup players, 3rd-string players. They're going to have 3 quarterbacks in that quarterback room that can play. And just like in Major League Baseball, where you can spend like you're a drunken sailor, a team with a payroll of $300 million is going to have a much wider margin for error and injury and setbacks and defections in the portal. And you're going to have some other schools that play money ball.
Right.
I said to a coach, like, when Oregon or Ohio State say they're going to spend $20.5 million, how much are we going to see on the field versus the sideline? The coach said, I think, you're talking about there may be $7 or $10 million on the field when they're on defense, and, it's $7 or $10 million when they're on offense, but there might be moments where the team on the other side has got a $7 million, team playing against them. They're just going to have to play money ball and invest right and get some guys, like bet on some players that have great years. And so I think you're going to see some of that going on, but my suspicion is that, like, Boise State, San Diego State, Oregon State, maybe some others, they're going to want to play and fight for those positions because they know they're auditioning. Like you said, that's a great way to put it. They're auditioning for whatever comes next and getting to the playoff and being able to say, hey, we had 3 10-win seasons in the last 4 years, and we made the playoff twice. That's a pretty good resume.
It is. And if you dive in further, and you figure it's 48 teams, right? There are currently 34 teams in the Big Ten and SEC combined. If you just say those teams are making it, and then there's room for 14 more. I mean, Stanford, Cal, Arizona State, Utah, Colorado, they're all competing the next 5-10 years for a spot in this thing, just like Boise State and Oregon State and Washington State are. So the pressure is on. Now, those schools have more resources right now because of their TV deals, but it's going to be a fascinating race to see who's ready if that, when the audition ends. All right, we got, here we go. If ESPN makes its announcement next month that it's opting out of its TV contract with the ACC, are schools free to bolt that conference, and are there exit fees? Well, so I'd say this. I don't know the details off the top of my head on the exit fees, but if ESPN, everybody thinks ESPN is going to renew, right? The ACC deal is a great deal for ESPN. It's locked in. It has cost certainty until 2036 with its two deals with the ACC. There's no reason to think that they're going to opt out. If they do opt out, it could cause a lot of damage to the ACC and create a ripple effect. But my understanding is that opt-out is only for one of the contracts, not for both. So there could be some legal machinations going on to see. I mean, my guess is this question is rooted in whether Stanford and Cal would be free to come back to a rebuilt Pac-12. And I think that is their very last resort. If something happened to the ACC and suddenly they were free agents, they would do everything they could possibly do to get into the Big Ten first, with the Pac-12 as a last resort.
Yeah, I think, look, that's what the Pac-12 is rooting for. I think they're rooting for a whole bunch of chaos and uncertainty, and those schools are already taking pennies on the dollar in their media rights distributions. But if I'm ESPN, I'm not opting out of that deal. That's a good deal for me.
It is indeed. All right, here we go. Last one on realignment. Are both of you tired of talking about realignment, specifically with the Pac-12?
I don't get tired of it because there's interest in it, and I find the palace intrigue element of this to be fascinating, and the ability to take readers and viewers and listeners behind the curtain is fun to me. But it's not why you get into sports writing. I mean, we've all had to become media rights experts and realignment experts.
No, for sure. I actually think it is endlessly fascinating. And if I could, I would do it full time. I would cover realignment full time because it touches on almost every aspect, right? It's political, it's financial, it's media. It involves, things on the front lines like recruiting and coaching. It touches everything. And I just think it is relentlessly interesting at a level, to me, that goes above and beyond what we see on the field for 4 months. I just am not sure that there is a market necessarily for kind of a full-time realignment beat. But believe me, if I thought there was, I would do that. I think it is just awesome stuff.
And the part of it that I love is that it's bringing in new audience, like Boise State and Utah State and San Diego State. And, we've got new viewers now and readers that are from new markets. And, and it feels there's an existential crisis feel about it, right? Because if you don't do this right, you are not positioned well for whatever's going to come next. I mean, your livelihood depends on it for these schools.
It does. All right. We got a question here about a former Pac-12 school.
Let's do it.
Here we go. If the current head coach at Oregon, which is Dan Lanning, doesn't win a national championship, but makes the playoff each season with 10 plus wins, would he be considered the greatest coach in Oregon history?
Oof. Well, you're comparing him with You're really comparing him with Chip Kelly, who took him to a national championship game. Mark Helfrich is not going to be in that conversation because of what he inherited and how he left it. I think you would probably, you'd probably put Lanning at the top because he would be playing for national stakes multiple years. Oregon's not going to be happy with that, though, Wilner. I mean, that's not the objective. The objective was not to get to the Rose Bowl and get your teeth kicked in, and I think there's a lot of people chalking it up going, look at the long layoff. Maybe that was part of it. All right. Sniffing around it before you break through. That's part of it. But if this is it, just making the 12-team playoff in most years, you're going to look at all the money that Oregon's spending, and you're going to say, they're not getting what their return on the investment isn't great.
So would you put Bellotti near the top of the Oregon coaching tree?
I think you have to look at different stakes, right? Rich Brooks was a builder of the program, and you consider him because he helped build it. You look at Bellotti because, he inherited what Brooks took over, sustained it, elevated it, got, and then had the vision to hire Chip Kelly and bring him in and then step out of the way, really. Right. And then Chip Kelly put, jet fuel on it, and it accelerated to the cover of Sports Illustrated and national championship game. That was unthinkable. And think about, if you go back to the Rich Brooks era and the Bellotti era, you could not have imagined they would have been playing for a national championship. Right. And here they were playing Auburn for all the marbles. I remember Chip Kelly looking at me at that news conference in Tempe. They're getting ready to, they're like a day away from kicking off the national title game, sea of reporters. And we had come from like media availability where there was like 6 people in the room. And Chip looks over at me and he goes, "This is crazy." Like, he just kind of, he was soaking it in. So, but I think Chip Kelly's in the conversation and Dan Lanning's in the conversation, but Lanning can't just win 10 games and never break through and be like the de facto guy. That makes it a big debate. And you start talking about James Franklin territory. If he's getting you there, but he can't break through, there will be questions about how good of a coach is he really, especially with those resources.
For sure. Let's see. What do we got? Also, is Washington headed in the right direction under Jed Fish?
What do you think?
I think it remains to be seen. I can understand their season that they just had, right? Total overhaul. He's hired late, total roster overhaul, Big Ten, a lot of obstacles there. But I'm not convinced Washington, and I think it's beyond Fish, to be honest. I think that the issue with Washington going forward is much more about the institution and less about Fish. Is Washington, and they're getting a new president coming in this summer, is Washington willing to devote the resources that Oregon and USC and Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan are devoting to winning the Big Ten to get into the playoff, right? I don't know that they are. We'll see if they do. We'll see how they manage the half share of Big Ten media revenue. We'll see how they manage their debt. We'll see how they deal with the revenue sharing and whether they go over and above. Because again, you want to win the Big Ten, you're competing with Ohio State and Oregon. They're spending $15 million on football and revenue share, and then they're going over that by $5 or $10 million with their NIL. Where's Washington going to be there? So I think in a lot of ways it's bigger than Fish.
I agree with that. And they went 6-7 this last year, and I kind of see the upside for him in year 2 to be like a 7-5. They play Ohio State and Oregon at home. I have those as losses. They go on the road to Michigan. They go to Wisconsin. They didn't look physically ready to play in the Big Ten in a lot of those games this year, and that concerned me. Now he's got a quarterback that I think can be
Juan Williams. Yeah,
he can be a Heisman candidate if everything came together 2 years from now, right? But I agree with you. I think Washington's move to the Big Ten is going to be one of these things that we look back at in a decade and we go, all right, they had access to the playoff in the Pac-12. Did they give that up foolishly to end up in a conference where they've got to compete with Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State, USC, if they get their act together, you're immediately looking at 5 schools and maybe a couple of others in that conference that you can't climb over it with frequency. And so Washington may not get to the playoff unless something changes and it's expanded dramatically, or they really go all in spending. And I think that would be one of those case studies where we look back in a decade and go, okay, you took a half share. You gave up your path to the playoff. How did it go for you?
Yeah. Great point. Great point. All right. Couple more on the, what do we call this? Miscellaneous.
Okay. Let's call them wild cards.
Wild cards. There you go. Well, as journalists, what are your personal guidelines and or rules for using the term allegedly in a story? Why don't you go first?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously a criminal element to this where, you want the presumption of innocence for somebody who's accused of something. So you use the term allegedly unless somebody's been convicted of a crime, to be fair to somebody. Like if there's an allegation that's levied, and you see a lot of time, frequent cases where somebody is either even arrested for something and they're not convicted. And I think, out of for the sake of accuracy and fairness, you use allegedly. What about you? Would you go beyond that, beyond the criminal element of it, or is it just limited to that?
No, it's on the serious side. Yes, it's limited to the criminal piece. I sometimes will use allegedly facetiously. Allegedly Oregon showed up for the Rose Bowl, right? That kind of thing. But no, it on a serious front for sure. You framed it very, very well.
How about this though, too? Like you made me think of something. Dan Lanning beats Ohio State in the regular season, 32-31. Ohio State runs out of time. Lanning is lauded as a genius the day after. The 12 men on the field, it was a genius move. Think about how thin that margin was, because
so thin.
Let's just say Will Howard slides a second earlier. Ohio State kicks a field goal and beats Oregon. Oregon gets to maybe they still get to the Big Ten title game. Maybe they even still are the 1 seed somehow, and they get their teeth kicked in the playoffs. The narrative on Lanning would be he still can't win the big one. And it goes back to, he beat Penn State in the title game. Maybe that would have been Ohio State instead of Penn State had Ohio State won that game. And then, he beats Ohio State at home, which was a huge win. It just shows you like the alleged margin between being a genius and being a guy who can't win the big one, is sometimes very, very thin.
Three 3-point losses to the Huskies, right?
Yeah.
I think, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great point. Who do you like more, Puck or Softy?
Oh, man.
Then these are KJR, Seattle folks.
Yeah.
I don't really know Puck. I love Softy. I'm on their show every week. We've had him on our podcast. Dave does a fantastic job. Dick Fane does too. I love those guys, but I don't know Puck, so I'll have to let you take that.
Well, Puck's a great guy. I mean, for people to know, pucksports.com, and Puck holds he longtime radio show host. He's now doing his own thing with a YouTube show, and he's a Washington State honk, and Softy is a Washington honk, as everyone knows. Now, I like both these guys. Can you be friends with these two guys who seemingly would never get along? You could get them in the same place and they would never agree on anything. But Softy's the better interview. Like, if we're going to have him as a guest, he's just such a caricature of what a diehard, unhinged media member, fan guy is. And you can tell he lives it. He dies with it. He's in tears when the coach leaves. He's elated when they win the game. They go to the national title. He's in tears. He's just so emotional about it. I just love sort of talking with him and pushing his buttons sometimes. So I enjoy interviewing Softy, and sitting by him at a game is something else.
Yeah.
But Puck is such a good human being. He's like coaching his kids' little league team. He's every man. You look at Washington State's fan base. He's really a representative of that fan base. And so, if you're going to be stuck in a car with Softy for 3 hours, that's going to be an experience for you. You better hydrate. Puck's going to be a much easier guy to take a long drive with and have conversation about, what's wrong with the world.
Gotcha. Yeah, we had Softy on That was before the Oregon-Washington game, right?
Yeah.
It's straight fire.
Yeah.
That was something else.
Yeah.
Let's see. When you guys got into the sports writing business, did you ever imagine it would evolve into this much fan interaction, which is what we're doing right now, actually? So what do you think?
I didn't really think about it, but I got a chance. I covered Notre Dame as a beat reporter early in my career. I covered Indiana basketball as a beat reporter. We worked together at the Mercury News, you and I was covering the NFL, Major League Baseball. You were all over college sports and a variety of things at that time. There was always interaction. It was just different. And, you were more aware of it, I think, when you were at the arena, when you could put eyes on people. I love the engagement. I love that people watching this podcast on YouTube can leave a comment in the comment section and we can respond, or you can tweet at us and we can respond, or, the comment section of my columns at johncanzano.com. It's like this oddly civil, intelligent place. It's not a cesspool. I like that better than like the engagement all the time that has no meaning and it's anonymous.
Right.
Or maybe old days being at a game and going, I don't know if these people are reading me or not. I like it.
I do too. I've always viewed our role, we're kind of the bridge between what fans are seeing, the athletes, the teams, and the fans themselves, right? Translating what's going on. And I cut my teeth, covering the Arizona basketball team in Tucson for the Daily Star, just out of college. And certainly there's tons of engagement down there. Arizona basketball, it's Tucson's 1 million people and it's a one-horse town. And so there's tons of engagement. But, technology has changed everything, right? I mean, podcasts, X, which I still often call Twitter by mistake.
Yeah.
I view X is like you walk into a sports bar and everybody starts yelling at you, right? And that's part of the responsibility of the job, and it can get a little bit unruly at times, but at the same time, you gotta deal with it as best you can. You got to try to inform and engage. And I think it's great that fans have more avenues to interact with either media members or the athletes and coaches themselves.
Yeah, I can remember covering the NFL and Major League Baseball and not feeling as connected to the readership.
Yeah.
But like maybe when I covered Jerry Tarkanian when he was at Fresno State, you go into the grocery store and 3 people in line turn because they know you're covering it and they want to talk about it. Like, to me, that's what social media and this YouTube show and the ability for people to have a conversation with us, Wilner, has added to it, because it feels more like we're in line at the grocery store and we're covering things that people and talking about things that people care about.
It's also interesting to think about a guy like Tark in today's age. Could he be Tark, right?
Pioneer.
There's so much interaction
that,
a lot of times athletes and coaches, they have to, recoil a little bit from the public view. Could Tark have been Tark? He had
he was oddly, because I went from covering Bobby Knight to Tark, right, the next season. And I found Tark oddly accessible.
Yeah.
There weren't layers of people between him and, the media and the fans. Like, he was oddly kind of just sitting with you. And there were several times I'm sitting with him and I'm like, this guy's a legend. Like, I'm sitting and other coaches, you can't get close to him. They're not even running their own Twitter accounts,
right.
But I mean, you got to acknowledge Tark had the NIL thing down before anybody else.
I mean, and those were iconic teams, right?
Yeah.
In the history of college sports, football and basketball, the Tark Rebels were near the top of the list. Yeah. And what would they have been like in the era of an iPhone, right? I mean, it wouldn't have just been a black and white picture of Moses Scurry in the hot tub with the fixer. That would have been a video, right? And it would have, man, that would have been something else.
Yeah. And he had this great, feel about him where it was, he against the NCAA. They're out to get me. Oh, that he explained everything. He explained it all away.
Right.
In just a second. It was just one occasion. It was one guy. It was, but He
Or
was
even
on to
Bob
something.
Knight. I mean, Bobby
Yeah.
Knight doing what he was doing with his players. If there had been video cameras or iPhones, totally different deal.
I found him to be very intense, and it was just there was never a dull moment. You always left your recorder running, even when you thought he was done, because he would turn back and, there'd be some kind of interaction. But he could be alternately really difficult to deal with and then fantastic to deal with. Almost, he got reporters up one time after a game in the media room, and he cleared the desk and he said, okay, here's what we were trying to do. This is your job as the 1 and the 2 and the 3. And he was a master class teacher when he wasn't losing his temper. And, his temper was,
my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate everybody who listens to this and everybody who asks questions, great questions on this episode. We encourage you to subscribe, hit that button, and make us make a commitment to us as we are building an audience here on YouTube. Share it with your friends and family. Read Jon Wilner at wilnerhotline.com. You can read me at johncanzano.com. And we are back with an all-new episode. Who do we have on the horizon?
We are scheduled later this month to have a football coach from one of the former Pac-12 schools. Don't have the dates pinned down, so I don't want to say too much. But we will have we got a sitting head coach coming in.
Sitting head coach coming in. Sorry, sitting head coach from a former Pac-12 school. I should put it that way.
All right. So that should be next 2 weeks.
10 possible candidates there, but it wouldn't be Kenny Dillingham. We had him on already.
That's right.
With 9 possible candidates. Hey, leave us a comment in the comment section. Tell us who you want us to bring on as a guest. That would be great. And have a great week, everybody.
Sure. Thanks very much, everyone.